If you like the Young Turks podcast, I think you'll love a lot of the podcasts on the TYT network. Old School, it's one of my favorites, one of the favorites for a lot of the listeners. Please check that out, subscribe, share it. That makes a big difference, and give it a 5-star rating. Thank you. All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, John Iadarola with you guys. We've got an amazing show for you, okay? So listen, we've got exciting changes coming up at tyt.com. That's our website. We do. Let's be cool. I don't want to when they happen, and they're going to happen over the course of the next week or so. We're going to do big announcements. It's already great. So for one of the stories we're going to cover today, Jacob Wohl is back. Remember, okay, the biggest clown on the right wing. I don't know why he's not yet in federal prison, but in fact, Ken Klippenstein, our senior investigative reporter, wrote about how the FBI might be investigating. But that's on tyt.com. You click on stories, boom. Click on shows, you get damage report.
And actually, if you go to tyt.com, go to the damage report section, you will see that we had Ken Klippenstein on today to talk about his awesome story having to do with war crimes committed by a Navy SEAL. And in that interview, I chastised him for not yet landing Jacob Wohl behind bars. So
he's working.
It all comes full circle.
It does. And the full circle is all on tyt.com. Okay, so today in the third hour, where we do our guests, I've got a couple of amazing guests for you guys. Somebody running for Mayor Pete's position in South Bend as the new mayor of South Bend. And I think she might have some strong opinions about how Mayor Pete did. So a little bit of drums, okay? And then a feel-good story. Now, if you're a cold-hearted person like me, you hear a feel-good story, you're like, I don't want to see the cat cooking. I'm not interested in that, okay? No, you're going to love this feel-good story about a young woman who wrote a book. And that's going to be live in the studio. It's going to be terrific. If you miss any part of the show, you know what to do. tyt.com/join. Or by the way, you can now do tyt.com/John. Okay, and that way John gets credit for it and actually helps him a little bit economically. Same price for you guys, same exact price. You could do Anna or John or Emma. We'll get the other hosts later. Of course, I'm left out as usual, but
that's a shame.
But anyway, so that's a great way to join. Okay.
Yes. Oh, also, I think that I inaccurately teased yesterday on the show, but on tomorrow's show, The Damage Report, presidential contender Marianne Williamson will be in studio on The Damage Report. We'll be talking about the campaign, some of the competition, her policies, all of that.
In fact, when I was on C-SPAN, they asked me, hey, where can we see all the presidential candidates that have been on the Young Turks? And you could see most of them on what we're calling the conversation. That's the third hour of the Young Turks, but we're calling it the conversation so you can easily go and see where all the interviews are. So that's also on tyt.com, but a lot of them are also showing up on the Damage Report, which is John's morning show, which you should definitely check out. And speaking of the conversation, on Thursday, Peter Dow, perhaps the single biggest basher of Bernie Sanders in the 2016 campaign. Will there be a moment of redemption on Thursday?
It is fascinating.
Fascinating indeed. The Dow Report on Thursday on the Young Turks. Okay, what do we have next?
We've got so much, but we're gonna be talking about Medicare for All for a while. Today, the House Rules Committee conducted the first ever hearing on Medicare for All. It has been a long time coming, and in particular, this hearing was focused on one particular Medicare for All bill introduced by Representative Pramila Jayapal. And we've got a variety of different excerpts from that. There was a lot that was going on, obviously, but I wanna start off with sort of the situation that has gotten us to the point where people believe that we need something like Medicare for All to deal with these issues. And so first we have Dr. Navi, who's an ER doctor, talking about the experience of a patient that he saw. It has to do with antibiotics and cost under the current system. Here's Dr. Navi.
She had had a fever, she couldn't afford an ER visit, so she decided to go to a local pet store to buy some fish antibiotics for her symptoms. She had had a job interview coming up and she wanted to make sure she was better for that interview. Now, of course, fish antibiotics come as a packet of powder. You put them in a fish tank so the fish can eat it. There's obviously no instructions for human consumption. She ended up overdosing by an order of magnitude. She had side effects that affected her brain and her central nervous system. She fell down a staircase while she was on that job interview, actually, and then she had to be admitted to the ICU. All of that because she felt like she couldn't afford a simple visit to the ER for a simple fever.
There's, John, there's a couple of things about this. One is, no other developed nation treats its own citizens with this level of brutality. So I've said this many times, but Medicare for All is just having the government run one extra thing that protects our lives. The government already runs many things that protect our lives: the military, police, and fire. This is not a takeover of the healthcare system. It's only healthcare insurance. But what it does do is, if you have a severe fever, you're not worried that, hey, I can't pay the bill if I go to the emergency room, or if I take antibiotics for humans rather than fish. And so it is an issue of morality, but also is an issue of cost. So there's 70 million Americans that are either uninsured or often go without treatment because the costs are too prohibitive, whether it's copays, premiums, etc. So she's an example of the people that goes without treatment, and she takes fish antibiotics in a moment of desperation because she thinks she can't afford the real treatment that she gets. Well, what it does is, then when she falls down the stairs, she's definitely got to go to the emergency room. And now we've created much more cost than we needed to. Yeah. If she'd just taken the normal antibiotics under our normal humane healthcare system, not only would it have been more moral, but it would have saved us a lot of money. And that is why this system is so backwards in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna repeat it every time going forward. Every other developed nation has a single payer system, and they all pay less. In fact, on average, they pay about half of what we pay. So the question isn't whether we can afford Medicare for all. The question is whether we can afford this current brutal system.
Yeah, and there was a lot of doctors, like Dr. Navi, have been sharing the experiences of the patients that they've been familiar with because of the way that things are run. And one that I saw involved a mother whose child came down with a massive fever, needed to go to the doctor, but they didn't think that they could afford it because of past gigantic bills that they'd had. So she drove the kid to the hospital. They sat outside in the van, and she was just watching the kid, thinking, okay, if she falls unconscious, if she has a seizure, then I will bring her in, but otherwise we just can't afford it. So they sat in the van watching, I believe it was The Little Mermaid on loop. And thankfully the girl did not get into a worse situation. But this mother she was in an unthinkable situation because she knew the family simply could not afford any sort of medical expenses. And it's really fast, it's bizarre. You mentioned, we fund the military, we fund, fire departments and all that. Like, we've decided there's a few ways we find it unacceptable for you to be killed. If Mexico decides to invade, we'll protect you. And if your house sets on fire, we'll protect you. But far more common things that will either kill you or lead to a significantly worse quality of life, you're on your own, we don't care. Even if hypothetically it would be cheaper to protect you against those things that are far more likely to affect you and your families, we've decided now we're gonna limit it to the bullets, the bombs, and fire. That's it.
Yeah, and look, I'll save it for the post-game because we have amazing witnesses that I want to show you. Amazing. But my father-in-law just got sick. He was visiting from Taiwan, and we sat there the entire time calculating how much it would cost if he went to an urgent care or emergency room. Meanwhile, we were worried it was a heart condition. But these are the brutal calculations people have to make in America. We'll talk about the details of that, like I said in the post game. If you're not a member, that's tyt.com/join to become a member, where you get the extra half hour of the Young Turks. All right, but let's go to the other witnesses.
Okay, so I want to turn to progressive activist for the Center for Popular Democracy, Adi Barkan, has ALS and traveled to the Medicare for All hearings, even though there was a significant medical risk to doing that travel because of how important it was to Adi that he explained to the people assembled there the urgency of dealing with the situation. And in the testimony that you're gonna hear, talked about obviously who the system is not working for, but also who the system is currently working for. And here's a bit of that testimony.
This healthcare system only works if you're a pharmaceutical or insurance industry executive who wants to maximize their own profit at the expense of people like me. It is simply unconscionable that I should have to pay $9,000 per month for life-saving medical care at a time when the insurance industry is raking in record profit. That's wrong, and it needs to stop. Here's the thing, it's a huge stress to have to fight with insurance companies over what they'll cover. It's a huge financial strain. But most of all, I've come to realize that our time on Earth is the most precious resource any of us have. I wish I didn't have to be here today. I think you are wonderful, Congressman, but frankly, I'd rather be back at home, being with my wife and playing with my son instead of trying to wake the conscience of this nation's lawmakers.
And obviously there was much more to it that you can find online, but it was powerful.
So Adi is one of the best organizers, one of the top progressives in the country, and it's impossible to think about him without it being heartbreaking. And so he is slowly dying, and it's hard to say out loud. But you're gonna see Congressman Raskin explain the difference between misfortune and injustice in a second. But for people who can't afford the treatment, think about how insane our system is. We just let them die. So if now Addie's not in this situation, but if you don't have any health insurance and you don't qualify for a government program like Medicaid, if you get sick or your kids get sick with a long-term illness, not hey they broke their arm, they've got cancer, we let them sit in the fire. We don't send the cavalry. We let them die. That's insane. And look at the costs that Addie talked about. The costs are preposterous. It would bankrupt any family. I mean, when we talk to people outside of this country, you could do it yourself. From any other Canada, Europe, Japan, talk to anybody with a country in a modern economy. They can't believe it. They say, really? America, the richest country in the world, just lets its citizens die without medical care.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, and obviously, I think people on our side, it goes against literally every political value that we have. But even on the opposite side, I don't remember the specifics. Maybe you remember better than I do. But there was a Republican primary debate in 2016 where they had a talk about this, and I believe that Donald Trump, who at that point was lying and pretending that he was going to take the healthcare situation seriously, that he would make sure that everyone was cared for and the government would pay for it. And I believe that he said, I'm not going to let someone just die on the streets, which is a position that some of the other Republicans running for the office were pursuing. And the reason that Trump was pitching himself that way is because no regular person who is not receiving checks from the pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare companies and all of that actually wants to see anyone, citizen or otherwise, die in the streets. But once you're handed a lot of money, you can be shifted to that position. And there is a lot of money, by the way. I looked it up. So far, just this year, 1/4, health insurance companies, healthcare companies, that sector has spent $156 million in 1/4, the most of any sector of our economy. And the reason is because we're in this environment where people are talking about things like Medicare for all, and we're talking about hearings for Medicare for all. And so they are ramping up their spending to make sure that the status quo is maintained. The status quo that the video we were just talking about, we were referencing how the current system, it is working for some people, and those people it's working so well for that they can afford to hand over $156 million in 4 months.
Remember, places like Canada, Japan, half our costs. It's not just a moral issue. It makes no sense at all to have private health insurance be a middleman where they soak up all the profits, give it to their executives, and there is higher medical errors, lab errors in America, higher mortality rates. Our results are significantly worse, and it costs twice as much. So imagine in mainstream media, if instead of hearing what you hear all the time, which is, how are you gonna pay for it? How are you gonna pay for it? They say it almost on a loop 24/7, right? If instead you heard, how are we gonna pay for this current system? This is twice as expensive as all the other developed nations. How are we gonna pay for this system? And if you heard constantly, we let kids die in this country if they don't have health insurance, I think that Medicare for all already polls at 70%. If you heard the truth, it probably poll at 90 or 95%. Why doesn't the corporate media do that? That's amazing. And by the way, one of the answers is just look at their programmings on cable news. Filled to the rim with drug company ads.
Yep.
And so those guys who under this current brutal system get to jack up prices on you, and the government doesn't even get to negotiate. Yeah. They don't want the cable news guys talking about how terrible this system, the facts about it. One small side note now, we're gonna get to a great clip from Representative Jamie Raskin here, but if you notice, Ryan Grimm, a Young Turks and Intercept reporter, was in the corner. He also covered the rally that they had for Medicare for All yesterday. You can check that out at facebook.com/rebelhq. All right, now let's do Jamie Raskin.
Yes, so Representative Jamie Raskin, who is a co-sponsor for the Medicare for All bill being debated in the hearings today, gave a powerful defense for the moral rationale for instituting a system like this. Let's take a look.
That I had learned something in this process about the difference between misfortune and injustice. Because if your life is going great, you've got not one, but 2 jobs that you love and a wife that you love, and my wife is here today, and kids that you love and constituents you love, and you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you you got stage 3 cancer, and you got a 50-50 chance of coming through it alive, that's a misfortune. It's a terrible misfortune, but it's just a misfortune because it's built into the nature of our species, you know? Any of us could be assigned such a verdict on any particular day. Anybody could get such a diagnosis. But if you experience such a misfortune and you get such a diagnosis and you can't get health care because you love the wrong person, or you lost your job, or you're not working, or you're too poor, that's not a misfortune. That's an injustice, because we can do something about that. And life is hard enough, Mr. Chairman, with all of the illness and accident and heartbreak, for government to be compounding the misfortunes of life with the injustice of denying people access to health care when they get sick. And in the richest country in the history of our species, at its richest moment, not to advance forward to adopt a Medicare for all system is to deny, I think, the common humanity of our fellow citizens.
That is so powerful. And when I think, I don't want to derail us, but when I think about how the person currently leading in the Democratic primary is against it, I just think about how there's no stronger defining issue that clearly differentiates the overall ideology and political values of our side versus Donald Trump and what he represents than what you just saw from Representative Raskin. And right now in the polls, looks like we might not go in that direction.
So I don't know if you noticed, but in the video, the congressman sitting next to Representative Raskin, when he makes the point about the difference between misfortune and injustice, goes, wow, like he hadn't thought of that. And it was a great natural reaction. And it is, that's exactly right. It's a devastating point. Look, guys, the good news is we're gonna win. We're gonna get Medicare for all. The only thing is, we just have to break the corporate media blockade, because they constantly misstate things. They say, oh, Medicare for all is gonna cost $32 trillion. They had a right-wing expert on to say that during the hearings too. But without explaining that the current system costs at least $50 trillion. I mean, what a terrible job of so-called journalism. And how could you not explain that every other country has half our expenses for significantly better results? We literally die earlier than other developed nations. We're the richest nation on earth, but we treat our citizens so poorly that we die several years earlier than other developed nations. Why? Because hey, the CEOs of private health insurance companies have to make more money. Really? Really? That's your justification? That's unbelievable. And what does cable news host do? They're like, they ask with a straight face, people who are for Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders, AOC, but it could be others. They're like, are you really gonna put private health insurance executives out of business? Are you really gonna prevent them from making hundreds of millions of dollars and taking home several different yachts? No other country that's developed in all the places that I described allows for that, because you can't privatize the fire department, the police department, or health insurance. Otherwise, your citizens die so that someone can make a profit. Yeah. Once we get that word out, they have no chance of winning. They have no chance of winning. But we also have to regain our democracy so that we don't have just cable news stations, but also politicians representing big pharma, health insurance companies, and they are. And this is what a lot of Democrats can't say. There's systemic corruption, and almost all the Republican politicians, but also a lot of the Democratic politicians are legally bribed in our system. They literally get millions of dollars from these industries, and those industries get billions of dollars from us, and that's why we pay so much and why we let our citizens die.
We talked about the amounts just a few minutes ago, $156 billion from one sector in 4 months. That's a lot of money, very appealing to the politicians who have apparently gotten over whatever moral qualms they have to letting people die in the streets, and they're getting paid. You don't hand over $156 million because the policies that your industry is supporting right now are popular.
Yeah, they're not doing it for their health, literally. Yeah. And they're certainly not doing it for your health.
Yeah, and when you talked about how the question will come, well, you're gonna put those companies out of business, the CEOs, they're gonna lose their jobs, things like that. Like imagine, like it seems absurd, but I can't even imagine, like Jake Tapper would never say, he would never like start his show and say, you know what? we should get rid of the fire departments, set up private fire fighting companies, and think about the wealthy CEOs that could be created from that. But as long as it's entrenched, as long as it's the status quo, even if it's immoral on its face, it seems like an understandable position to defend.
But I guarantee you that if we did have private fire insurance, Jake Tapper would say that.
I just used him as the first thing that popped into my head. I have no idea what
and it doesn't matter, fill in the blank, okay? Look, and it's not personal. These guys are not bad guys. They just are in the middle of groupthink and they don't even realize it. And if you told Jake Tapper that he's a good guy and he's a relatively smart guy, he would be like, no, I would never say that. That's outrageous. But Jake, you're in that system now. You're in the burning building now. And you're saying, well, I mean, the executives got to make money, don't they? I mean, what are we gonna do? It's private industry. We have to protect it. He doesn't say we have to. He just assumes it and frames every question in that way. If we had private fire insurance companies and they were making billions of dollars, and they're running ads on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, I guarantee you every question would be framed as, what are you gonna do? Put the entire private fire insurance industry out of business?
Yeah. Okay, there's another video that we do have to get to, but I think we should probably take our first break. But when you come back, we've been talking about the willingness of some on the other side to just let people die in the streets, and a Republican congresswoman is gonna come right up to the line of admitting it after this.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
All right, back on the Young Turks. So a couple of programming notes. Matt Walsh is gonna be on Old School tomorrow night, so don't miss that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. He plays Mike McClintock on Veep, and he is, of course, representing the print edition of BuzzFeed. And so that's gonna be fantastic. And we've got an extended post game on Thursday because Knock Down the House is coming out on Netflix. That's the story of how AOC and 3 other Just Democrats ran for office. And that documentary won a Sundance, yes, won the awards at Sundance. I was just forgetting which particular award. I think it was the Audience Award. And so it's an amazing movie. It comes out on Netflix on Wednesday, and we're gonna watch it. All of you guys watch it on Wednesday, and then together we'll review it on Thursday. We're gonna not do the post game just for members. In the post game, in the last half hour of the Young Turks, we're gonna review it together. So please check that out. And Ida Rodriguez and Brooke Thomas are gonna join me for that. Let me read a couple of comments.
I didn't know you were doing that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's almost like a book club. So it's a movie club. And Jess at I know, right? I had to explain that. Anyway, Jess.
That's deep.
Yeah, Jess at #IMTYT says, I don't know where we would be without the life-saving help from Medicaid that my son receives. He has ADHD and Asperger's. Just one of his medications costs $1,800 for only 30 pills, which is just 1 month's supply. How? How can you pay $1,800 for just one of the medications for a month, per every month? It's impossible.
I'm like the most secular person imaginable. I don't like religion getting involved in our politics any more than necessary, even religious terminology. So I don't generally like the word evil, but you need to move to these words to describe the system that we have.
Look, unfortunately, that's true. Sage and Candle on YouTube Super Chat says, I have intractable seizures. I canceled my EEG twice because it was 15 miles away and I didn't have $8 to get there. So this is the state of America. In the richest country in the world, we treat our citizens with absolute barbarism.
Yeah.
So, all right, now on to lighter stuff. Canada Rocks writes in on YouTube Super Chat, just watch Cenk's takedown of the racist on C-SPAN. I almost cheered and clapped as loud as when Arya stabbed the Night King. Almost. Strength for progressives, it's awesome to see. Thank you, and a lot of people have been talking about it. In fact, I'm gonna read you one more comment. This is from the members section, and then I'll tell you where you can watch it. Lorena writes in, hello TYT, I would like to thank Cenk for the amazing interview on C-SPAN, Washington Journal. I got fired up after watching it. I actually watched it 3 times. It's like 48 minutes, you watch it 3 times, that's amazing. It's so good, she explains. Finally, someone unapologetic calling out the right wing. Cenk took by surprise the last caller from North Carolina. She paused for a minute, she wasn't expecting someone calling her out. I actually laughed out loud, to be honest. Great job, keep up the good work, and thank you for fighting back. So look, a lot of people have been buzzing about it. I really appreciate all of you saying that. So you can go to tyt.com and go under special coverage, and you could watch the whole appearance. So thank you for those kind words.
It is, I think it makes me a little bit optimistic that you can still have call-in shows in the current age. Like if you just asked me and I didn't know, I would guess that you could not, that it would not be a sustainable thing considering how crazy people are.
Yes, but look, to me, you can have caller shows if the guest is interesting enough, right? And is actually saying things that aren't boring or standard. But that goes to the bigger point, which is, why is everybody like heads blown up by what I did on air on C-SPAN? Because they almost never see strong progressives on air. Almost never. So when I actually fought against the right wing and I called them what they were, people were like, are you allowed to do that on TV? I thought, I mean, the right wing can say anything they want about progressives, anything. And that's totally allowed on TV. But even the host was like,
you know,
right?
I haven't really
and
thought
he's a
about
good
that.
guy, by the way, don't get me wrong.
That's a really interesting problem. I think that like Bill Maher and C-SPAN should have a panel of people who used to run the CIA and ex-Republican lawmakers who don't really like Trump to talk about that.
Yeah.
They should break down why that is.
John, I got good news for you. That panel exists all over television.
Oh, it does.
Okay, all right, what's next, John?
Oh, okay, a little bit more on Medicare for all. There are a lot of really bad arguments for why we shouldn't have a system like Medicare for all, but one of the worst is that yes, we could institute a system and it would produce better results for the American people at a lower cost and it would make sure that everyone has health insurance, but those undocumented immigrants might use a little bit of it. That's the worst, I think, and yet that is what Republican Debbie Lasko brought up during the Medicare for all hearings, as you see.
Will this bill provide free health care for illegal immigrants?
There's nothing in the legislation that excludes the undocumented immigrants from receiving benefits. So my working assumption was that they would be eligible for benefits, yes.
And so I can tell you that my constituents, and I would guess the majority of citizens in the United States, would not feel happy that they are going to be forced to pay for illegals that aren't citizens free health care.
Regarding undocumented immigrants, we're already providing care for them for free in the most expensive way possible. They're coming to the ER because of that 1986 law signed by Ronald Reagan, and they're getting care and no one can stop them, and it's the most expensive place to get it. Medicare for all would provide such that these patients who are already getting care would just get that care in a more fiscally responsible way.
Most people in the United States are not going to voluntarily want to be paying for illegal immigrants free health care. And so there's a difference between people coming here illegally and showing up in the ER. And by the way, we have a huge crisis at the border. But I can tell you, I go to a lot of different meetings in my district and quite frankly throughout the state. And there's not going to be anybody happy about paying their taxes for free health care for illegal immigrants.
But it's not about ideology. We're already doing that. The only difference is we'd save money in doing the same thing that we're doing now.
Well, we can debate this. Obviously, we disagree, but I can tell you I've heard loud and clear from people consistently they do not want their taxes going to pay for free health care for illegal immigrants.
And they can take it up with Reagan.
Yeah, well, there's two different things here. She is representing a certain percentage of the population that really thinks, no, I don't care, let them die. I'm not gonna pay for the illegals. So she's not alone in that. I believe her that not all of her, and I would venture to guess not a majority, if you really explain the situation to them, not a majority of her constituents, but some percentage of her constituents would say, yeah, let them bleed out, I don't care, right? But there's a second part of it, which is just facts. He says, no, but we already do pay for their care because we don't, as a society, we decided in the Reagan administration that we're not going, if they get shot, for example, or they break their leg and they're bleeding, we're not going to let them bleed in the street. They can get care right now. It's just the most expensive kind of care.
Yeah.
And she's like, we can disagree on that. No, we can't disagree on that. You're wrong on the facts. And so when you say that, God, the right wingers get so emotionally hurt. They're like, oh, we see, like these guys, these intellectuals quoting facts. I don't like it, right? But look, make your so-called moral argument that we should let people die. But you cannot argue that it is in fact the law. That is true. She's a United States Congresswoman. You don't know that law, that's okay. I don't know all the details of that 1986 law. But once you do know it, you can't be like, well, I don't like it, okay? And I don't agree. And so we can disagree about that. Okay, then are you gonna introduce legislation taking that away? That's a thing you can say, but you can't say that that law doesn't exist. Okay, now on to the morality of it. Really? I understand people saying, look, I don't want an undocumented immigrant coming here and then getting super expensive cancer treatment, etc. I don't agree, but I understand it. But for the people saying, no, if they got in a car accident and they have a mortal wound, let them die in the street. Wow, this is the party of morality? Nah, you can't possibly make that claim. You can raise your hand and say, yeah, I don't care about my fellow man. I don't care about what Jesus said in the Bible about taking care of the poor or the needy. I don't care about any of that, and I'm not a moral person. I just want to protect every cent that I have, and if it means somebody bleeds out or their kids bleed out, I don't care. I don't even want to pay for the sweep up afterwards. But you can't claim you're a moral person.
Yeah, I don't know what percentage would be fine with a person who'd just been shot bleeding on the streets, but some percentage of the American public. I don't know what percentage would admit it, but more would believe it.
But she just said it over and over again. He said we have to admit them into emergency care.
Yeah. Well,
and she said I disagree.
And you were being too fair, saying maybe she's not familiar, even though you said she's a congresswoman. But everybody knows that emergency rooms have to accept people. Everybody knows that, it's talked about on TV and all that stuff. And so that was Dr. Farzan Navi, by the way, who was rightly laying out the facts. Believing that facts still matter. That is the hill that I will choose to die on, even though I have less and less faith with every passing day. But I think the reason that it was unconvincing to her, it seems nonsensical. If you're saying we don't want to do this thing, and it turns out that we're already doing this thing, but at a more costly way, moving on with it seems illogical. But it only is illogical if she's being honest about why she supports the status quo. She says it's about cost. If that were true, she would find the information he provided to be interesting and something she'd want to learn more about. But I don't believe, I'm not gonna say for Debbie Lesko specifically, but I think for a significant number of conservatives, it has nothing to do with cost whatsoever. It has to do with something deeper in their political values, and that is the desire for hierarchy. Because while the current system where they go to the emergency room is certainly more costly, that doesn't mean from the point of view of someone who believes in like sort of stratifying society that it doesn't have benefits. It does have some benefits. Yes, they can come in the emergency room and be saved if they're shot. But in most cases, they will suffer more beforehand. They'll deal with chronic illnesses and things like that won't be taken care of in an emergency room. They will suffer, and even when they do go, they will be stigmatized in going. They have to go to the emergency room, even for things that don't normally require that. And so at every step along the way, even if they get care, and even if it costs more, they still are made to feel like an out group. They're made to feel lesser than those that we deem it okay that they have health insurance in the first place. I don't know that she believes that or believes it consciously, but I think that there's a significant number of American conservatives that desperately want to hold on to their even slightly higher position in the hierarchy in America when it comes to healthcare and other things like that.
Yeah, and meanwhile, ignoring the root cause of the problem. So did you get any sense from that Congresswoman that she cared to pursue information, knowledge? They're having hearings. This is not a vote. They're having hearings. Hey, I wonder what the cost is. I wonder what the laws are. I wonder what we should do. Did you get a sense of inquiry? No, because no one has changed their mind in Congress in decades. Yet on cable news, we have these pretend conversations about what does the honorable gentleman from Connecticut think? He doesn't think anything. He thinks, where's my check?
Yeah.
So Debbie Lesko already got her check. And she very likely got paid by all those same industries that are affected by this legislation. Since she already got the check, she's not interested in your facts. And she's not interested in your morality. The check cleared. Yeah. This is a sick system where we allow legal bribery of people like Debbie Lesko. You got to get the money out so we can actually have representatives that represent us, the people. You want to do that? wolf-pac.com/join. Get into the fight, make a difference. Be like Adi Barkan. I mean, have you ever seen anything more courageous? A person suffering from ALS goes all the way to Congress and he says, there's nothing more valuable than time. There's nothing more valuable than time. And I'm sitting here thinking how many days I got left with my kids. And I'm here trying to help others because we have got to fix this system. So whether it's Wolfpack or it's Medicare for all rallies and groups, etc., whatever it is, by God, join and get involved. Otherwise, we're never gonna fix this corrupt system.
Do you want to take the second break or move on to Venezuela?
All right, let's take the break. Venezuela's situation is enormously important, and we have updates for you guys, and then there's the debate as to whether it's a coup. All right, I'm gonna ruin the tease. It's a goddamn coup, okay? We'll explain when we come back.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your active ID more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. First of all, I want to tell you about Aspiration. They're a partner of the Young Turks for good reason. Wonderfully progressive. You guys know it, man. You could set your own fees. You can set them to 0. All ATMs free. 2% on your 2% interest. It's unheard of. Literally 100 times more than your bank. Check with your bank. See if you can get 2%. They'll tell you about 0.02% is what you can get with your own bank. So now it's a financial institution. They save a lot of money by not having retail stores, but they give you good customer service. So that's how they save the money and can then give you a lot more. And they give away 10% charity. All right, aspiration.com/TYT. Go sign up today, aspiration.com/TYT. Now let me give you some of the quotes here. Visquous Cree says, to be fair, Cenk, Jesus always checked the sick and wounded's green card status before administering treatment. It's true, he's like, wait, oh, sorry, you're a Canaanite. No, get him out, not interested. Imagine if Lazarus was a Philistine. Like, oh, sorry, hey, the guy's got no papers. I'm not rising this guy from the dead. He's got no papers.
Imagine if you thought you had a guide to morality literally written by the person who created the universe and you decided to learn nothing from it. Imagine the absurdity.
No, we're not Christians, but if you are, that is a hell of a point.
And no, and by the way, there are Christians. My grandfather, who recently passed, was a progressive Christian his whole life. He was unbearable about it, never stopped talking about it, but he did come to the right conclusions and he grounded it in his reading of Jesus's teachings. So it is possible, there are others.
Yeah, they're out there. Try reading the Bible, see how it goes. All right, so Hercules says they are not white, and thus white supremacist party called the GOP doesn't care for their lives. So that's one possible explanation. CJ says, regarding care for quote unquote illegals, diseases spread from one person to another regardless of legal status. It is to our own personal advantage to keep others healthy. And you know what Debbie Lesko would say? Well, I agree to disagree. You know, I don't know if the diseases spread from one person to another. All right, okay. The Beard says, if my $2,200 a month for one prescription was covered by Medicare for all, and my taxes helped a quote unquote illegal immigrant pay for their medications, I would gladly do it because I'm helping my fellow man. And last one is from Twitter. Cabbage says, US citizens don't mind getting free healthcare overseas, but by all means, be whiny little bitches. Okay, so it's a harsh way of putting it, but I read it because I think it's important. You're like, if you go to France and you get sick, you're like, oh, good, I can just walk in anywhere and they'll treat me, right? And it doesn't cost anything. If you don't know that, you're maybe a little amazed by that, but you feel like, well, that's your right, right? But when people come here, even if they're just traveling and they get sick, God help them. We're like, oh, I don't want to pay for it. They're from France, they're from Taiwan, I'm not gonna pay for it. And then people are like, what? Wait, I had to take an ambulance and my bill is $5,000? $15,000? Let alone what happened in the emergency room? It's unbelievable.
Can I ask you a hypothetical? So, awesome trip to Paris. Representative Debbie Lesko gets really sick, bad cheese or something. Does she volunteer to pay on principle?
That's my answer to that. Okay, what's next?
This world we live in. Okay. Oh, nothing but good news actually.
Oh,
so
yeah, I'm sure,
everybody,
yeah.
Don't worry at all. Situation in Venezuela was bad yesterday and it's much worse today because Juan Guaido, the US-backed opposition leader in Venezuela, has begun what is being called in some quarters a military uprising. In others, there's a shorter term for it. But in any event, it's against Nicolas Maduro and it has been developing throughout the day. As of this point, it is difficult to say exactly what percentage or which blocks of the military are supporting one side or the other, but there has been violence already. So leading up to this, for weeks, Guaido's supporters have held protests aimed in part at convincing the nation's military, which has thus far remained mostly loyal to Maduro, to break with the dictator and support Guaido. At dawn today, he released a video calling on the entire country, so this is huge masses of the people, but also the military, to switch over and have overthrow him. Now, Maduro responded shortly after that video by saying he and his supporters have, quote, nerves of steel, and that he wants the, quote, maximum mobilization of the people to assure a victory for peace. Since then, there have been video clips that have been coming out showing both protests but also clashes between different groups. Although there are some people who will claim that they are enough experts of the domestic situation in Venezuela to easily tell the sides apart and understand exactly what's going on. I will not pretend to do that, but there is at least the beginnings of violence with armored vehicles being driven into crowds of people, shots being fired. I have not seen any word yet specifically of casualties, but it is not difficult to imagine that happening. It's also not difficult to imagine that that sort of result could be the strategy of at least one side.
The 52 people apparently, last we heard as we were going on air, have been taken to the hospital, some because of rubber bullets, but no report of anyone dying yet. So John was referring to what the American propaganda outlets, not just the United States government, but a lot of the mainstream media, in bowing their heads to the United States government propaganda, have started calling an uprising. No. An uprising is something we're doing here in America, where the citizens are sick of the current political system, and whether it's fighting for healthcare or the environment or getting money out of politics. We're doing an uprising. That is a political event. This is not an uprising. This is an obvious coup. See, when you ask for the military to switch sides and turn their guns on their colleagues and compatriots, that would be the definition of a coup. When you say, hey, not only are we going to do protests in the streets from citizens, but I've got people lined up at the border, and he does. Former members of the Venezuelan military are now at the border with Colombia, saying they're ready to be activated to come in. And Guaido has asked that you come armed. What part of this is complicated? So
gun enthusiasm, that's all that is.
Yeah, I'm sure. So the only thin reed they have to justify not calling it a coup, and currently the United States government is pressuring and bullying. It actually reminds me of what Erdogan does in Turkey, where if the media, any branch of the media disagrees with him, he calls them and harasses them and bullies them. And that's what John Bolton, Pompeo, and the US government is doing now, and it's working brilliantly.
Would you like to see some examples?
Yes.
They have put out at least a little bit of communication. So Secretary Pompeo says, today interim President Juan Guaido announced start of Operación Libertad. The US government fully supports the Venezuelan people in their quest for freedom and democracy. Democracy cannot be defeated, but we are going to try in 2020. Then
hold on, let me explain. So that's the goes to the thin reed. They say no, technically it's not a coup because Guaido, we think, is the duly elected leader of Venezuela. Well, was he elected president? No. Prime minister? No. Well, he was elected to Congress, and there's a clause in the Constitution that says that if some member of Congress decides, and with and his party does run that portion of Congress, decides, hey, you know what? The president didn't win the election legitimately, so I'm now president. That he gets to be president. I wonder if they would agree to that in America. If the Speaker of the House said, you know what? The president didn't really win more votes in our democracy. I'm now the president. Would they be like, oh no, that's totally fine? And you know what? It's actually Donald Trump doing the coup. Nancy Pelosi's the legitimate president, and let's move on.
Yeah.
My guess is they would not agree to that.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump talks about how a legal case in the Justice Department is a coup against him. But when they grab guns in Venezuela, John Bolton says all options are on the table, and we might do in other words, implying we might do a military invasion of Venezuela. They go, not a coup, not a coup. And all the media bows their head and goes, yes, sir, not a coup. Wait a minute, if Guaido, in your supposed explanation, is the legitimately elected president, again, that's nonsensical, of Venezuela, then isn't Maduro doing the coup? Because somebody's doing a coup. They got guns pointed at one another. So it's preposterous.
It's vigorous democracy. And so as you pointed out, Donald Trump has had coups on the mind recently, but it tends to be just of the investigating his finances type. And so he just tweeted, I am monitoring the situation in Venezuela very closely via Fox and Friends. The United States stands with the people of Venezuela and their freedom. Capitalized there. Yes, he's on it. He's watching.
Yeah, two things about that. First of all, they keep saying it over and over again. Because of course he's not, right? And when you're doing a coup, you would want the president who is supporting that coup of the most powerful country on earth to be paying attention. Hey, are we doing this right? How's it going? Should we react on the spot, etc.? And you know that he has 6 hours of what they call executive time every day, where he just eats burgers and watches Fox. So they're like, no, for the first time today, the president is actually at work. And this is a big deal. He, from time to time, between burgers and Fox and Friends, is actually paying attention. Like that's like a news event. Shouldn't the president be paying attention every day?
Yeah.
Besides which, I don't believe them that he's paying close attention. He doesn't pay close attention to anything. And this coup does not, if they branded the coup Trump, then he might pay attention. Like, whoa, okay? But basically what him and Pompeo are saying is not that Operación Libertad has begun. They're basically saying Operation ExxonMobil has begun. Because John Bolton literally said it on Fox News. He went on and said, yeah, we're gonna look out for the interests of American companies and specifically American oil companies in Venezuela. This coup is on behalf of ExxonMobil. It doesn't mean that Maduro is a good guy. I think Maduro is a bad guy in 100 different ways, and I know that every issue breaks into camps. You're either pro-Maduro or anti-Maduro. Sorry, at the Young Turks, we do not play that game. So Maduro is not a good guy. I don't believe it was a legitimate election. And if Guaido pursued his constitutional case in a way that was peaceful, there's some chance that I would be on his side. But when he coordinates it with America, and then our national security head goes on television, goes, we're doing it for the oil companies, and then they take guns into the streets and try to do a coup against the sitting president, then no deal. It doesn't mean Maduro's a good guy, but this is not the way to do it. They're starting a civil war. And that brings me to another conclusion. Guys, think about it. You think that they're gonna do this right? Mm-hmm. Look at the two main guys in charge, Donald Trump and John Bolton. Ugh. Donald Trump, a total incompetent. You think he planned the details? You think he was like, all right, guys, now what if it doesn't succeed? And in fact, let's talk about how it's going to succeed. If we want him to capture the palace in this case, how would we get there? Whose support do we need? Do we have the Chief Justice on our side? What percentage of the generals do we have on our side? What are the chances that Donald Trump asked any of those questions? 0%. Okay, so now let's say that our military or et cetera have some smart people. Well, you got to go to the John Bolton, who's the head of national security, and he's the one most enthusiastic about this. He's the idiot who helped plan the Iraq war. How'd that go for us? It's just because John Bolton is not mentally unstable like Donald Trump doesn't mean he's smart. The people who planned the Iraq war thought that they would throw roses at our feet, that it would just take a couple of weeks. It was the worst foreign policy blunder of our lifetime. John Bolton still thinks it was a rising success. If Iraq is a success, wait till you get a load of Venezuela. And who's leading this charge? Bolton and Trump. So
with an assist from Lou Dobbs.
Yeah, and I would say the good news is that means it's not gonna work, but none of that is good news. Because look, the Maduro government is brutalizing the people. I mean, the situation is horrible there. There's got to be an approach that gets them to the negotiating table, but now they're not gonna come to the table. After you plan a coup, you think they're gonna come to the table? I mean, in a bad case scenario, Maduro wins and the pain of Venezuela continues with bloodshed on top. In another bad case scenario, Guaido wins and goes, great. All the oil contracts now go to the American oil companies and the robbery of Venezuela has begun. The worst case scenario is nobody wins, and we have a protracted civil war.
And possibly not even just civil war. We could be involved. It could be an international thing that draws in other countries in the region.
This kind of intervention is a disastrous idea, a terrible idea. Look, they'll say, well, Cenk, John, you libs, this guy has human rights abuses, Maduro does. We have to act, really? We have 45 dictatorships with terrible human rights records that the United States has military bases in and actively supports. There's over 70 dictatorships in the country with terrible human rights abuses. We're not invading any of them. We're not encouraging coups against any of them. In fact, a lot of them we prop up and support and put our military bases in and go, bravo, way to crush your people. And they're not on CNN talking about the human rights abuses in those countries. They're just not doing it. Why Venezuela? And the only other country that we're thinking of having armed conflict with is Iran. Oh, look at that. Two of the top oil producing countries in the world. Have you seen that at all on cable news? Other than John Bolton actually admitting it, have you seen any of the anchors going, could this be about the oil? No, wait, human rights. Human rights, they found out there's human rights problems in Venezuela.
And also, I would imagine, I don't watch a lot of mainstream like CNN or whatever, but they're gonna have a block of 6 hours of panels. There'll be an hour in the middle that's about Donald Trump standing up for liberty and freedom in Venezuela. And then flanking it will be 2 to 3 hours on each side of how he's demonizing asylum seekers, how he hates people from Latin and South America more than literally anyone else in the planet. Like, can you find another piece of evidence from 2 years of the Trump presidency that he has ever given a damn about anyone south of the border with Mexico? But suddenly, in this particular case, it's standing up for the people, standing up for democracy and freedom, human rights and all of that.
That's such a great point by John. So you're telling me that the anchors on cable news and a lot of the reporters in print journalism, who I respect more generally, with a straight face are reporting that Donald Trump really cares about the people of Venezuela, and that's why we're doing this? Really? And you call yourself a journalist. Is there any evidence to back that up? And I guarantee you, if we tell them the real reason and you go, hey, those are two of the top oil producing countries in the world, behind the scenes, not on air and not in print, they would say, of course. Do they ever write it? Do they ever say it? No, that would be a conspiracy theory. No, the conspiracy theory is that Donald Trump would ever care about a Latin American.
Yeah.
He has shown no evidence that he has ever done that. And now all of a sudden he's like, oh, the pain of the people of Venezuela. Hey, are we gonna allow them in? There's like millions of people that left Venezuela because of how disastrous it is. So are we gonna allow all of them in as refugees? Because I hear Donald Trump cares a lot about the people of Venezuela. Oh, we're not going to let them in.
Yeah.
So maybe, just maybe, he's lying for the 10,000th time. And in this case, that is literal.
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta do Jacob Wall. We gotta do Jacob Wall. Okay, let's do it.
It's not what I would call a small story, but I will do what I can. Small men, not small story though. Okay, two of the biggest right-wing frauds currently operating in the United States cooked up another one of their amazing plans to attempt to derail the presidential aspirations of Pete Buttigieg by recruiting people to lie and say that he had raped them. That's ridiculous. It shouldn't have to be on the news, but it is true because we as a country have not either just driven off into the shadows people like Jacob Wohl or sent them to prison. And honestly, at this point, I'm not sure how exactly he is not in prison, but I want to give you details. So a Republican source told the Daily Beast that lobbyist Jack Berkman and internet troll Jacob Wohl approached him last week to try to convince him to falsely accuse Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, of engaging him sexually while he was too drunk to consent. The source said Berkman and Wohl made clear that their goal was to kneecap Buttigieg's momentum in the 2020 presidential race. The source provided a surreptitious audio recording of the meeting, which corroborates his account. In it, Wohl appears to refer to Buttigieg as a quote, terminal threat to President Donald Trump's re-election next year. So that source said no to it, did not participate, and in fact taped it so that they could prove that this had been going on. But on Monday, a separate individual using the name of Hunter Kelly published a post on the site Medium in which he alleged that Buttigieg sexually assaulted him in February. That post was tweeted out by David Wohl, Jacob's father, proving that the apple does not fall far from the absolutely horrible tree. Now, 2 hours after that, when reporters from the Daily Beast reached out to that person, Hunter Kelly posted a message to his Facebook timeline headed, "I was not sexually assaulted," and communicated with reporters saying, "It's important for everyone to know that I was not sexually assaulted and would never falsely accuse anyone," alleging that the Medium site had been used without his consent to produce the allegations against Buttigieg. Now, how did this person get wrapped up in this whole situation? Well, a statement was provided to the Daily Beast that said from that Facebook account that Wohl and Berkman flew Hunter Kelly to Washington, D.C. and showed him a statement detailing the bogus allegations against Buttigieg, which they then posted without his permission. He went on to say that they also tried to get him to sign off on a script for a press conference over his protests, but he called his family to come get him and then fled.
Okay, so I want you to understand there's two different people here. So they've been trying this all over town. And here's a particularly horrible part of it. They're going to gay Republicans and they're saying, okay, I think you'll do our bidding. Now, normally the way that this works is more sophisticated. You go on Tucker Carlson's program and you defend the terrible things he said about gays and you say that you're gonna help your left-wing friends understand how great Tucker Carlson is. That's a sophisticated way of using gay Republicans. In this case, they're like, hey, we just wanna bury our opponents, you're gay, why don't you just make up that Buttigieg hit on you, or not hit on you, sexually assaulted you, right? So they didn't do it, but and one of them, to his credit, recorded them, and Daily Beast, great reporting in this case, but in the Hunter Kelly situation, that's the one that they made up the Twitter accounts, et cetera, a month ago, and then they said, oh, okay, yes, I was sexually assaulted, and he had to come out 2 hours later. They had this whole company that they had created, and they did this
Potomac Intelligence.
Yes, they did this with the Mueller case too. In the Mueller case, Gateway Pundit, that'll print anything, printed it. Oh yeah, Mueller is sexually assaulting people, etc. It's because that's what the alt-right does. But Wohl is so out of control. Even the Gateway Pundit at one point had to be like, okay, we're not working with him anymore. Wow, when they say that, I mean, you have to be absolutely Chernobyl-like nuclear in how toxic you are. In this case, Big League Politics printed it. It's not like you can't find a right-wing website. Normally, the way that this game is played is you'll find an alt-right or a right-wing website to print it, and then a so-called more legitimate right-wing website like Daily Caller or something. They're all the same folks, will pick it up and make it a story. Daily Caller is allowed in the White House. Obama let him in the White House, and then people are like, oh, that's legitimate. So Fox News will run it, and that's how they do swift boat veterans. That's how they said Hillary Clinton was having an imminent aneurysm, and the list goes on. And then there's Seth Rich, and the list goes on and on. But now Wall and Berkman have taken it to a new level. And so when people are outraged by it, understand this is just a difference in gradation. It's still the same playbook. I mean, what did Project Veritas do? O'Keefe, he did the same thing, but enormously successfully. He went after Acorn, and Republicans and even some corporate Democrats voted to defund Acorn based on made up videos, doctored videos. Then they did it to Planned Parenthood. And O'Keefe broke several laws. But there's right-wing privilege in this country. The right wing can break laws ad nauseum, whether it's Donald Trump or O'Keefe, and get away with it. Jacob Wall, now, based on our reporting, Ken Klippenstein did a story. He did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information, from the FBI, and they said that they could not respond because it was part of a law enforcement proceedings. So that means that Jacob Wall might be in a lot of trouble. But he's still free man, even though he's made up one thing after another. He did a press conference at CPAC just in February, saying that Ilhan Omar married her brother. And then he went and reported fake death threats against him from Omar's fans. None of it is true. By the way, they were him. And by the way, that is reporting something that is false to the police. That is a crime. And all the people who are so mad about Jesse Smollett, oh, you can't report a fake crime. I mean, you should go to prison for that. So where's Jacob Wall? He should be in prison. But instead, he's out there making up more stories. So this Potomac Intelligence, they have a whole website. It's all nonsense about how they're doing Saudi work for the Saudis. They put out statements like, we will not apologize for the anti-terror activities. It doesn't exist. Okay, just like the other one, run out of their mom's basement, literally in Jacob Wall's case. And so when Daily Beast calls and asks about these, their website, their LinkedIn page, and all of it went down in minutes. All of a sudden gone. Gee, I wonder if it's real or not. Okay, so there is no end to how low these guys will go. Look, we've made fun of Jacob Wall, and one of the guys actually, the source for the Daily Beast, not Hunter Kelly, recognized Jacob Wall. He was using a fake name, but he recognized him from his internet fame. I don't know if it was because of the Young Turks or other people that have covered it. And he's like, that guy's not Bill, he's Jacob Wall. And so he started recording when he realized it was a scam. And so that's why they got the information on him. Now, in some ways it's funny. At CPAC, Jacob Wall had a security guard. We showed you this before. Let's bring up graphic 43. He was the smallest security guard in American history. But that's not the funny part, although it's slightly funny. The ear pod in his ear, pretending to be security, it's just an ear pod. So that's this clown. When they asked him, hey, you said you went to Harvard. Did you really go to Harvard? He said, no, that's a figure of speech. No.
Oh, you don't know that figure of speech?
No, I don't know that figure of speech. So, I mean, in some ways he's comically stupid. No, in a lot of ways, and so is Berkman. But these are crimes that they're committing: fraud, impersonating officers, making up crimes. I don't know that they impersonated a police officer, but they're impersonating other people. And then there's federal issues at stake here. This is an uneven playing field. No one on the left does this, not within miles, not within continents. And you have constant scam artists on the right. I mean, look at what they're doing. They're accusing someone of sexual assault, trying to ruin his career. And they're like, who cares? Who cares? We don't care about the truth.
I don't care.
And I mean, guys like Roger Stone started this, where one side plays dirty nonstop and will lie about anything. But our media generally calls it even. Now, they don't call it in the case of Wall and Daily Beast's wonderful reporting. And if you tell somebody at CNN, they'd make fun of Jacob Wall and they know he's a joke. But they take O'Keefe seriously, they take Roger Stone seriously.
And there will always be a Republican billionaire to hand him $500,000 to start up some BS blog or another intelligence, whatever. Like he's still more legitimate in terms of that because they like it. Like nobody on the right actually cares that he's lying when he does this. What they care about maybe a little bit is that he's caught, but not enough to stop following him. I mean, he's trending again based on this effort. How many times has he trended on social media based on just trying to break the law and sort of failing ridiculously and owning himself, but he just gets more and more notoriety, which again, Trump has proved is never going to hurt you. It cannot hurt you in the modern day. And at some point, these buffoons will break the law in a slightly more sophisticated fashion. It won't be as comically easy to tie them to the crimes that they've committed, and it will ruin someone's career. They're not the only ones, as you pointed out, we're currently doing that. They try to do it to the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, and like Majority Report had to deal with that same sort of thing. They're in the business of trying to destroy careers, and at some point, they will even accidentally, it'll work. They'll get someone to claim that another one of the candidates in the 2020 cycle did it. And maybe eventually we will figure out that it was Jacob Wohl in them. But I have no doubt that those same CNN panels that'll laugh at him briefly now will be running with that if it looks even semi-credible.
And lastly on this, when their source expressed reluctance to take part in their scam, they assured him that, don't worry, it'll make you wealthy, famous, and a star in Republican politics. And there actually is a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to take a break. When we come back, we've got amazing stories for you guys. So come right back with us.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of the Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk, and I'll see you soon.